Wrestling has taken over MMA. From Merab's 20 takedowns in a single fight to Chimaev's explosive shots and suffocating top control, most recent UFC champions have had a strong wrestling base. Everyone has their theories, the cage favoring sambo wrestling, judging bias towards control time, certain countries encouraging wrestling at a young age. All are partially true, but neglect the fundamental reason as to why adding wrestling into a combat sport is borderline unfair. In this video, we'll explore why having a wrestling base is so effective, then break down how strikers can work to overcome this issue. If you like cold, in-depth analysis, subscribe, hit the bell, and let's get started. The root of the problem is a basic but often neglected thought: speed. This is a 1-2 combo from Nasruddin Imavov, one of the fastest middleweight punchers in UFC history. As you can see, it takes him approximately 170 milliseconds in order to land. This is a double leg takedown from Kyle Baralho, and it takes him approximately 200 milliseconds to make contact with his position established. So within the same weight class, even when comparing to a fast striker throwing a full combo, the striker only buys a 30 millisecond advantage. Now to defend said strikes, the fastest method is simply to maintain your guard to block. You can also step out of range or parry, but ultimately you have several minimalistic options. However, when defending a takedown, your fastest option is typically a down block. You have to drop your hands and move your hips back, which costs more time than the fragile 30 millisecond striking edge. Yes, you can still defend if the down block fails and they reach your hips, but then you have to sprawl, which takes even longer. With every extra action, the speed and balance grows. Now, a few of the slightly less patient among us may have already taken to the comments to argue that they can down block in under 200 milliseconds. While that is technically true, it doesn't actually save the striker. In studies, even perceiving a visual stimulus can take 130 milliseconds, and responses typically don't start for over 200 milliseconds. By then, wrestlers are already at the hips. While athletes may be able to decrease the reaction time, it still leaves an incredibly small window to work with. In wrestling matches, the wrestlers maintain a stance that allows them to make the smallest possible adjustments to defend takedowns, and even then they don't always react quickly enough. A wrestling stance is also not viable in MMA, as leaving your head presented and open does tend to get you knocked out. This of course begs the question of how anyone ever stuffs takedowns in MMA. The boring half of the answer is that while getting to the hips is a significant advantage, it doesn't guarantee a takedown. The wrestler could make a mistake, there could be a strength discrepancy, the defender could simply have much better technique, etc. The more interesting half has to do with anticipation. When you see someone slip or duck under a strike, it's not because they managed to move their head and body within a fifth of a second. It's because they preemptively moved based on their ability to read their opponent's movements and anticipate a strike. The same goes for wrestling. If a wrestler always uses the same setup, or always shoots from the same portion of the octagon, it becomes significantly easier to preemptively defend and kill the shot. But utilizing anticipation breaks down as soon as a high-level wrestler adds in a simple strategy: feinting. If someone feints a strike at you, generally speaking you have to defend, because unless your name is Marvin Vittori, punches and kicks do tend to have the ability to knock you out. This forces your guard to your head, allowing the wrestler to then shoot to your hips uncontested. So even in cases such as Chimaev, where his opponent knows he's going to shoot immediately, the feint prevents them from preemptively defending. By incorporating the simplest of striking tools, wrestling becomes even harder to deal with in MMA. As we've established, reacting to the takedown in time is quite difficult, but it doesn't even stop there. A high-level wrestler will continue to chain their attacks after a failed first shot, forcing you to continuously defend different looks and angles. While every transition does allow the defender an opportunity to escape, they ultimately have to react to the movement of the attacker, continuously testing the reaction time and putting them behind. McGregor's technical takedown defense against Khabib was actually solid, but he wasn't able to escape the chain and was therefore eventually taken down. So when we consider the difference in distance you have to cover to defend takedowns versus strikes, how that's aggravated by human reaction time delays, feinting having a disproportionately large impact on wrestling success, and the fact that the wrestler doesn't even need to succeed on the first attempt, it becomes obnoxiously clear. Wrestling has a fundamental advantage over striking in MMA. Now that we can see the puzzle, let's start to put the pieces in place. Against wrestling-heavy opponents, strikers have started to have success boxing with their lead hand down. Since at least one hand can immediately switch to defending the takedown, it lessens the issue of having to cover distance with your hands. JDM utilized the strategy against Bilal to hit down blocks and kill the shot immediately so he could get back to striking. This created a significant step up in his takedown defense, doubling the percentage of takedowns he defended from his previous fight. The pitfall of this strategy is that you become much more reliant on head movement. Half the guard is half the forgiveness. Allen got rocked by Evloev in large part because of this, despite having the superior technical striking. So while the tactic has merit, it only shifts the advantage a wrestler has into a realm a striker will be more comfortable with. It doesn't eliminate the edge. When something is banned in a sport, it's often because it's too effective. In pure wrestling, circling on the back foot is banned. Not just because it would make the sport quite boring, but mainly because there's no real counter. As circling creates a constant movement off the center line, it becomes incredibly difficult to line up a takedown. In MMA, this forces the wrestler to either use more striking to set up the takedown, or take a bad shot and emphasize chain wrestling. When Hendricks fought Wonderboy, every time Hendricks tried to close the distance, Wonderboy would circle out quickly. You could see him getting visibly frustrated, not having the opportunity to even start a reasonable takedown attempt. Hendricks lost the fight without landing a single takedown, despite having taken down a much better wrestler in GSP. The evasion can also lead to opportunities for offense. When O'Malley utilized this strategy against Sterling, Sterling got desperate to create offense and overextended, opening up to the shot that dropped him. The ability to employ a movement-based strategy ultimately depends on the style of the striker, but more thought-out distance management never hurt anyone. But in the end, the best way to negate the advantages of a wrestler is to convince them to not wrestle at all. Kindly asking probably won't work, unless the opponent is Kevin Holland, but fear will. Constantly throwing and feinting uppercuts, knees, and teeps will quickly shut down the notion of a wrestler taking naked shots. And if they choose to ignore it, well, Frankie Edgar didn't respect the knees of Gutierrez and paid a steep price. Even if a wrestler does get in on a shot, just defending isn't enough. Punishing the shot with damaging elbows or submission attempts will get you closer to ending the fight, as well as discourage even properly set up takedowns. Both can be used within transitions or after failed attempts. Poirier attempted takedowns in every round he fought against Holloway until one of those attempts ended with him in a tight darce. Poirier didn't shoot for the rest of their second fight, and only shot a single takedown their entire third fight. John Silva threatened with guillotines whenever Mitchell wrestled, and since Mitchell continued to wrestle, Silva eventually found the finish. Edmund blasted elbows as Bird tried to chain wrestle, leading to a knockout. All of these strategies are to some extent conditional. Dropping a hand may not be wise against a wrestler with heavy hands, staying on the back foot may not work for a pressure striker, punishing may be difficult if there's a massive grappling discrepancy. But by considering all tactics available, there are ways for a striker to chip away at the wrestler's advantage. Tactics certainly help, but wrestling will be considered overtuned in every meta. This isn't necessarily a problem, it's just the nature of the sport, and it's why fighters have generally gotten more well-rounded over time. Even a striker as talented as Petr Yan has takedowns in most of his fights, showing the value of at least establishing the threat. If you like this breakdown, consider subscribing for more in-depth analysis. Thank you for watching, and until next time.